Well, good morning, everybody. Robert Phoenix here, broadcasting to you live and direct from Flyover, also known as Fredericksburg, Texas. What's happening out there? What's happening in there in your world? This is a little foray into how we can blend our consciousness and psyche together, and hopefully, I can stimulate and tingle your neuroreceptors so that you can open up to something new, a new perspective, a new way of seeing, and maybe even a new way of being. Good morning. Good morning, Mrs. Anderson. If you don't know that, Judy, that's a reference to Mr. Anderson from The Matrix, from Agent Smith. Just in case you were wondering why I was pronouncing your name in such an unusual fashion. No coffee this morning. I've already had it. I've been up and at 'em since 6:30, just doing my best to get on top of things, see what's going on out there in the big wide world. And as always, there's quite a bit going on. Never a dull moment in the Matrix. Am I right? And of course, our good friend of the show has just arrived, and he'll be joining us shortly. Judy says, "Hey, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Maurice. How are you?" Oh, look who's here, right there. The sun rises. Hello, Lori. Of course, there's Jasper. Jasper's always getting in on the show. He's a camera hog. Should probably have his own channel. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. So I'll spend the next 20 minutes basically attending to Jasper while I'm trying to get this thing going here. He's kind of an inspiration in a lot of ways. You know, Jasper was a street cat. He belonged to a street person in San Francisco as a kitten, and he couldn't keep him, so they took him to the animal shelter. So Jasper is he's a reclamation project. That's what he is. He's doing pretty good. Doing pretty good as a domesticated. Rosie is the fierce one, though. I got to tell you, man. Between Rosie and Jasper, it's not even close. You don't cross Rosie. She really sweet, but bad. You don't cross that cat. Hey, what's going on, Annie Brito? Annie Brito, welcome to the show. And good morning to you, Lori. So let's get into a few things today. Tabbies are super sweet. They are. Orange tabbies are the best, man. He's like Mr. Personality. Except he eats everything. He's a pain in the butt in the kitchen. Every time I walk into the kitchen now, he thinks something's going to happen. Something amazing is going to occur. It's not always the case. Hey, I wanted to get into this story a little bit. It's a very strange story. I wanted to bring it up. And there was a big limo crash in New York City. It was in a place called Schoharie. And there's a very strange backstory to this limo crash. So this is, I guess this is in upstate New York. I'm going to read this to you. This is a local newspaper, Times Union. And it says, the owner of the limousine company that crashed in Schoharie, killing 18 people on board and 2 pedestrians, is a former FBI informant who testified in several high-profile terrorism cases, a state official confirmed Monday. Shahed Malik Hussein, who owns Prestige Limousine in Wilton, according to the official and public records. The limousine company is being scrutinized as federal and state investigators try to determine what caused the crash. Do you think maybe somebody got pissed off at this guy and decided that they were going to make his life a little bit more difficult? Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on Monday said the limo involved in Saturday's crash at the intersection of routes 30A and 30 had failed the Department of Transportation inspection last month and should not have been on the road. Okay, so not only is he a former informer, and by the way, I'm not sure if you're ever a former informer. I think once you're in, you're in. But he also failed an inspection. That's on you and your government, Mr. Cuomo. The driver did not have a proper license to operate the vehicle, the governor added. Well, I guess when you're an informant, you don't need things like licenses. Prestige Limousine shares a business address with Crest Inn Suites and Cottages in Wilton, a motel that has been owned by Hussein for about a decade. Hussein and his wife previously lived at the motel, but the manager, Annie Cornett, on Monday said they were no longer living there when he moved in about 18 months ago. Public records indicate Hussein still owns the motel and continues to operate the limo company. Hussein owns the business, but the limo service has largely been operated by his son, Naman Hussein, who met on Monday afternoon with investigators from the state police major crimes unit, which is may have contributed to the deadly incident. Naman Hussein was accompanied at the interview by his attorney, Lee Kindlon of Albany. Shahed Hussein is out of the country and did not attend the interview, police said. Hussein's path to becoming an informant began after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when he was arrested in an FBI fraud investigation in Albany that targeted a ring of corrupt translators, state motor vehicle workers, and nearly 100 immigrants who had illegally obtained driver's licenses with help from Hussein. At the time, Hussein owned and operated the Getty gas station on South Pearl Street in Albany. He also worked as a translator for the State Department of Motor Vehicles and had routinely accepted bribes of several $100s each to help immigrants who in some cases couldn't drive well or pass written exams they couldn't understand, according to court records. Following his arrest in December 2001, and while facing the prospect of a long prison term and eventual deportation to his native Pakistan, Hussein agreed to become an informant for the FBI. Okay. Here we go. They had him. They had him by the short hairs. Hussein had immigrated to the U.S. in 1993 and still held a green card at the time he went to work for the FBI, which credited him with helping arrest more than a dozen people, including the people involved in the DMV scandal and a member of an Afghan-based heroin trafficking ring. Wow, this guy was up to his eyeballs in shit. But it was Hussein's work as an informant in a controversial counterterrorism sting in Albany that thrust him into the spotlight. He worked an undercover role posing as an arms dealer to help federal authorities snare two immigrants with no criminal backgrounds at the time. You know what? It's called entrapment. Entrapment. Yassin Aref, an Iraqi refugee and imam of a Central Avenue mosque, and Mohammed Hussein, a Bangladeshi immigrant who owned a pizza shop. Aref and Mohammed Hussein were both arrested in 2004 and accused of laundering money in connection with a fictitious terror plot set up by the FBI's informant. Okay, so this guy set up his own terror plot. They jumped in because he was posing as an arms dealer. That's how the game works. They were convicted in 2006 and both sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Aref was recently released from prison and is being held in custody pending his deportation to Iraq. The attorneys for Aref and Mohammed Hussein, Terence L. Kindlon and Kevin Louisbrand, respectively, had harsh words for the informant who helped convict their clients. Terence Kindlon is the father of Lee Kindlon, who was hired by the limousine company this week. Well, that's a little incestuous, don't you think? During the Albany trial, there was testimony that the informant's recorded conversations with Albany targets were in Urdu. The informant would then translate those conversations for FBI agents, who later learned that the translations were not always accurate. Gee, maybe you should have somebody who is maybe not a Pakistani national, maybe somebody who's from England or from the United States translate that stuff. Anyway, the whole thing is bizarre. It's totally bizarre. I'm going to keep reading. Terrence Kinlan once called Hussein a confidence man, whom he said could not be trusted. Well, that's perfect for the FBI. In May 2009, Hussein, the informant, resurfaced as an FBI informant when 4 men from Newburgh were charged with conspiring to plant explosives outside the Riverdale Jewish Center and the Riverdale Temple in New York City. As in the Albany case, Shahed Hussein posed as a wealthy businessman and befriended the men before implicating them in a terror plot. The 4 Newburgh men, Laguerre Payan, James Cremity, Anta Williams, and David Williams, not sounding very Muslim there, were convicted, but the FBI's use of Shahed Hussein drew harsh criticism and raised entrapment questions. 3 years later, in 2012, Shahed Hussein again took part in an undercover sting, this time targeting the then 33-year-old man, Khalifa al-Akili, who lived near Pittsburgh. Al-Akili told the Times-Union in an interview that year the FBI had used Hussein in an apparent attempt to test Akili's interest in jihad and anti-American views. Al-Akili, who was later convicted of a firearms charge, said he was approached by Hussein, who went by the name Muhammad, and another man who used the name Sharif. Sharif don't like it. Rocking the Casbah. When they turned up in his neighborhood, repeatedly made attempts to get close to Al-Akili, but Al-Akili said he quickly figured out Hussein's identity as an FBI informant. He said the men were too obvious and requested receipts, even for small items they purchased like coffee and donuts. Oh my God, what a dead giveaway. In addition, he said a cell phone number Hussein had given him was the same number used by Hussein during the 2009 counterterrorism investigation against the 4 Newburgh men. Al-Akili said he found the number and its connection to that case through simple internet search using Google. I love it. I love it. Don't you love it when the internet wins? Or we win with the internet? I'm not identifying with this guy, by the way, but come on. You got to admit that's kind of cool. It's like he completely hacked this thing and figured it out. I love it. Maybe the FBI should hire that dude. If I were them, I'd get on the phone with him. Hey, you're pretty good. You figured this shit out. How would you like to have a job? Cornet, the motels. Okay, although Hussein's undercover work had exposed his residency in Wilton, he never left the area. And for years had lived a quiet life at the Hard Scrabble Motel along Route 9, a few miles north of Saratoga Springs. Cornet, the motel's manager, said they occasionally received mail there related to the Limo company, but that Hussein kept the vehicles at another location. Several years ago, Hussein tangled with the town of Wilton for running his limo business out of the back of the hotel without a permit. Town officials asked that he keep the vehicles in Latham, where they'd been previously stored when not in use. Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's records on Prestige Limo show that the company had 2 drivers and 3 vehicles. A total of 5 inspections were done in the company's vehicles over the past 25 months. 4 were taken out of service as a result, which is a rate of 80% failure. The national average is 20%. All right, there you go. A deadly crash at the hands of an FBI informant. Could be just a crash. Could be just a regular straight operator error crash. But it also could be that somebody got pissed. I mean, clearly people knew he was an informant. Like, the guy was able to figure it out by getting into YouTube, not YouTube, but Google, getting some pertinent info. There's something I read the other day that really caught my attention, and it's kind of related in some ways, but in other ways not. This showed up. This showed up a couple months ago, and it has to do with taxi drivers and suicides. It's a kind of a dark subject, but I wanted to cover this a little bit. And so taxi drivers, like, I remember going back into the 80s, 90s. There was a time when I wanted to be a taxi cab driver. That was part of my thing. Just like, because I thought it would be interesting. You get to meet people. I like people, hear their stories. I knew San Francisco like the back of my hand. And I thought, wow, this could be an interesting little gig while I'm doing some writing. Didn't really work out for a number of reasons. But I wanted to read this to you because taxi cabs have always been sort of this outpost where you could get a job if you knew how to drive, where to drive, lived in an urban area. And if you were somebody like a writer or had somebody who had other interests, like Mel Gibson in conspiracy theory, you could be a taxi cab driver. It was kind of like one of these service-oriented jobs, like being a waiter in some ways. It's always available, give you some freedom, set your own hours. But that's changed. And again, this is kind of a canary in the coal mine moment. So it says technology has pushed a vulnerable, largely immigrant population into an economically precarious situation, even as its prospects of upward mobility dwindle. I'm going to read this to you. This is from The Atlantic. And it's not too long, but it's worth reading. I remember when growing up in the outer boroughs of New York City, taking a cab was a rare treat. The one time I hailed a cab as a teenager is because I'd returned home. By the way, the author here is Rehan Salam. He's a contributing editor at The Atlantic. Taking a cab was a rare treat. The one time I hailed a cab as a teenager was because I'd returned home from a school trip in the wee hours in the morning, and my parents gave me special dispensation to do so. Alas, the cab driver I flagged down refused to take me deep into the heart of Brooklyn on the grounds that it would take him too far from the nighttime revelers who was bread and butter. I'll admit that this rejection stung. The neighborhood I grew up in was home to many taxi cab drivers, and it occurred to me that there was a decent chance he didn't live that far from me. Still, I could see his point. With my father's war stories about driving a livery cab in the 1970s in mind, I was more than sympathetic to the man who booted me out of his cab than I might have been otherwise. Yes, I needed to get home, but he needed to make a living. Since then, much has changed. For one, the competition among professional drivers in New York City has intensified. Whereas the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, the TLC, was responsible for overseeing 97,000 licensed taxi drivers and drivers of other for-hire vehicles in 1989. Not long after my board of cab journey, the number now stands at 180,000. Of course, that is not all that's changed. New York has become more affluent than ever. Neighborhoods that were once very much off the map are now bustling with affluent young professionals, many of whom can afford an Uber or Lyft when the prospect of taking public transportation seems too demoralizing. Their dollars have swelled demand for drivers, which in turn has stimulated supply. Notably, the drivers who've heeded the call are almost all immigrants, like my father, who was himself a driver long ago, and the man who turned me away a little over 20 years ago. Indeed, the story of professional drivers in New York City arguably makes the case for low-skilled immigration. Rather than competing with well-off native-born New Yorkers, immigrant drivers are complementing them by ferrying them from their well-appointed lofts to their spacious offices to their favorite ethnic restaurants. As of 2016, 91% of the city's professional drivers were immigrants, many of whom hail from the world's poorest countries. Half of all drivers of non-app-based for-hire vehicles, traditionally the most lucrative slice in the market, hail from the Dominican Republic. Almost a quarter of taxi drivers, meanwhile, are originally from Bangladesh. Together, the marriage of new technology and the globalization of New York's low-wage labor market has left consumers much better off. Finding someone to drive you home for money has never been easier, and no doubt many of the women, and mostly men, doing the driving are delighted to have found remunerative work. What we have here, certainly at first glance, is a classic free market success story. Recently, though, the dark side of the story has been growing rather conspicuous. Since December, there has been a rash of apparent suicides among the city's taxi drivers. And if their advocates are to be believed, and I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, these few deaths speak to the despair experienced by thousands of other drivers. Sensing an opportunity to make their voices heard, taxi drivers and their champions are pointing to the rise of ride-hailing companies such as Uber and Lyft as the source of their woes. That is the same disruptive force that has so enriched consumers and drivers, has also, according to this line of argument, immiserated taxi drivers, especially those who've invested their life savings in purchasing taxi medallions. These are not cheap, by the way. To get licensed, to be able to drive a car in a place like New York City, it's pretty expensive. Once prized as a virtual guarantee of financial security, these medallions, which grant their owners the right to operate a taxi and to lease it to someone else, have plummeted in value as the rise of app-based services has given New Yorkers a convenient alternative to hailing a yellow cab. One libertarian scholar, Peter Van Dorn, has argued the medallion market was like a fairly priced lottery ticket that took into account the possibility of deregulation. And he makes a compelling case. But that is a small comfort for the people who've been financially ruined in the crash, such as Yu Ming Chow, the most recent of taxi drivers, said to have taken his own life. In an interview with Vincent Barone of AM New York, Bharavi Desai, executive director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, insisted that something must be done about the resulting labor glut. We now have a saturation of tens of thousands of workers, even after working 10, 12, 14-hour shifts, who are talking about hunger and poverty, and that's not acceptable. With this in mind, Desai has called for imposing more stringent regulations on the ride-hailing sector to create a more level playing field, and presumably to desaturate the pool of drivers. The end result would undoubtedly be better for the immigrant taxi drivers she represents, many of whom have been in the country for a little while and who don't want to toil for poverty-level wages for the rest of their lives. Don't blame them. I don't blame them. Every time I've gone to New York, most of the cab drivers I've had have been, quote-unquote, ethnic. And most of them have been pretty good drivers. And usually, cabs or car services. I've taken a few Ubers and Lyfts in New York, but mostly cabs and car services. You learn a lot of interesting shit from taxi cab drivers. I remember one time I was in a car service on the way to the airport. I was on my way to, I think it was JFK. And I'm talking to this guy, and he tells me about how he knew for a fact. He would take the he would take these guys, right? He'd pick these guys up at the airport, and these guys were Jewish diamond merchants. And he told me this story about how they would go. They had their own access or their own exit point at both LaGuardia and JFK, where they didn't have to go through customs. So they would basically fly to Antwerp and they would buy diamonds. These are the diamond traders of New York City. And when they got off the plane, they did not have to deal with customs. They had their own exit, and they would have vans on the streets waiting for them to pick them up. You get to learn interesting things from taxi cab drivers. Anyway. So here's what's going on here. Let me read. I think there's a couple more paragraphs here. Let me continue with this. But what about the newcomers with whom they're competing, the ones who are at risk for being desaturated out of the industry? Consider that there is a reason so many people are clamoring to sign up to drive with Uber, Lyft, and their various competitors and clones. Simply put, the poverty level wages on offer are the best available option for thousands of foreign-born New Yorkers. It's not just foreign-born. I mean, there are people who are being pushed out of other jobs and other industries who are at kind of the tail end of the service-oriented industry, which is basically driving for Uber or Lyft. And there's so many people driving for Uber and Lyft now that even that market is saturated, not just oversaturating the taxi market. If there were legions of employers willing to hire low-skilled workers at wages that would afford them anything like a dignified middle-class life, we would be contemplating the quiet desperation of New York City's taxi drivers who are crying out for relief. They wouldn't fear competition from leaner and hungrier new arrivals, who haven't been in America long enough to know how easy it is for low-skilled workers to find themselves trapped in dead-end jobs. They have long since moved on to bigger and better things, maybe. Usually the notion that new low-skilled immigrants represent competition for those who already live among us is airily dismissed on the grounds that the labor market is dynamic. And so too are low-skilled workers. When faced with new competition, New York City's immigrant drivers are supposed to learn new skills. They're supposed to enroll in their local coding academy at night, or enroll in a master's program in social media marketing or food truck management, and allow newcomers to take their place on the bottom rung. But what if climbing the ladder isn't quite as easy as it sounds? One of the reasons younger Americans are so optimistic about immigration, I suspect, is that many of us are the children of newcomers who in earlier eras were fortunate enough to make the transition from working class service jobs to jobs that offered a bit more pay, status, and stability. I count myself among them. To allow for the possibility that low-skilled immigration has different implications today, when the prospects for upward mobility among low-skilled workers are almost universally acknowledged to be bleaker than in years past, before a cavalcade of social and technological changes greatly reduced their power, seems almost sacrilegious. It smacks of dishonoring one's parents and grandparents. And so piety wins out. We badly want to believe that we still live in a non-zero-sum nation in which good-paying jobs for low-skilled workers are abundant, and opportunities for advancement are always just around the corner. Instead, we have taxi drivers who are being driven to suicide because they can't bear the competition from slightly more desperate people who want the little that they have now. And all this is unfolding at a moment when the labor market is at the tightest it's been since the turn of the century, and before the potential of labor displacing automation is close to being fully realized. So one of the things, there are a couple of things about this piece, and there are other headlines around these taxi cab driver suicides. And this is just from the New York Times a day ago. I'm just going to read this to you. I'm going to get into sort of the social implications here because they're significant. Uber driver's death marks 7th for hire driver suicide within a year. This guy's name is Fausto Luna. Isn't that interesting? You know, I've been talking about the death of the Dionysian culture. The death of the Dionysian culture and the rise of the Apollonian culture, or the rise of the Apollonian society, which I'm going to talk about, by the way. And this guy's last name is Luna, and his first name is Fausto, like Faust. Isn't that interesting? The death of Luna. It's like doing a deal with Faust. The Lunarian side of Faust. Interesting. Let me read this. About 24 people gathered outside a Washington Heights subway station on Sunday afternoon to remember an Uber driver who became the 7th for-hire driver in New York to commit suicide within the last year. The mood at the vigil turned from somber to anger in less than 30 minutes. Fausto Luna jumped in front of an A train on September 26th at the 175th Street and Fort Washington Avenue station. That's way uptown. Way uptown. He is the first Uber driver to commit suicide this year in New York City. The other 6 drivers drove yellow taxi cabs for livery or black car services. As ride-sharing vehicles have abundant the taxi market in New York, taxi cab drivers have been hit with increasing debt, despite working longer shifts, leading to incredible stress and depression for some. But those financial hardships are not limited to cab drivers. Uber and other ride-hail drivers have also complained about low pay and unending competition as more people sign up to drive. Uber said Mr. Luna was a longtime driver with a high rating and consistent earnings. He owned his vehicle and was fully paid for, the company said. At the vigil, attendees brought signs bearing Mr. Luna's name, along with the names of 6 other for-hire drivers who died. Many spoke out against the mistreatment of for-hire drivers. I am proud to serve the capital of the world, Victor Salazar, a taxi driver for more than 26 years, said in Spanish. But we are right now in a very deep crisis. We must concentrate ourselves as workers and the people we are. You know, I wonder how much of the employment stats and data have to do with people driving for Uber and Lyft. I wonder. Mr. Luna's death comes after New York became the first major American city to halt new vehicle licenses for ride-hailing services as the city studies the industry more. Meera Joshi, the city's taxi commissioner, urged drivers who are struggling to reach out to the city for help. This is the forefront of the issue. That is the forefront of the issue, is making sure people know how to reach out for help. Well, great. As you reach out for help, what are they going to do? Pat you in the back? Reaching out for help can be almost as depressing as the actual crisis itself. But she added, it's convenient to blame a person. If I need to be the subject of people's anger, that's fine. I can take it. It doesn't bother me. But I don't know that it really addresses the fundamental underpinnings of the situation the drivers are finding themselves in now. Her advice, however, did not seem to resonate with some vigil attendees who shouted at her. A few of them blamed her for the recent suicides, and some cursed at her as she walked away and then disappeared into the subway station. I'd like to have that gig. You're supposed to be in charge of regulating this stuff. And because it is, at this point, up until this point, has been so unregulated that there is a glut of drivers. Now, okay, here's what I'm going to say, and it may not be politically correct. May not be politically correct. But maybe, just maybe, New York City theoretically should put a damper on immigration. Because if you have more immigrants entering into an area where these low-level jobs are completely oversaturated, so driving a taxi or being able to afford a car, not just any car, like if you drive for Uber or Lyft, it's got to be less than what, 6 years old? So the price of that car is going to be much higher than a car that's 10 to 15 years old, which might be more affordable. So you're already in debt to get a car that's reasonably new. So maybe common sense says we should cut back on allowing people to come into the country and come into the city. I know it is a radical thought. It is a radical thought, but perhaps the system itself needs to be corrected so there can be a more stable, logical, and rhythmic assimilation. I know it's crazy talk. I know it's freaking crazy talk, but hey, maybe this is what is needed. You see, when we get into this now, we're talking about, guess what? The breakdown or the shift between the Dionysian, which is the lunar culture, right? And that would exhibit somebody who might have a rather thin skin, or might be in a position where their feelings are, to some extent, vulnerable. Emotions are quite different than feelings. But as we're moving away from this lunar-based, and we are, I can clearly see it. We are moving towards the rise of the Apollonian. Now, the question is, will it be, the white sun or the black sun? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But this would be an Apollonian decision. No, we have too many people coming in. We cannot assimilate them gracefully enough. We have, and what's more cruel? I mean, it's kind of like, penning a bunch of animals in a place where the pen just can't support all the animals. So I guess natural selection says some of those animals who are weak will take themselves out. But for whatever reason, they'll get sick, they'll get depressed, they'll stop eating. Some other bigger animal will peck their eyeballs out or whatever. I'm using chickens here, roosters as a metaphor. But maybe, since we're supposed to be so enlightened, that really curtailing on the immigration piece could slow some of this down. Now, that's a bit of a Band-Aid, to be honest with you, but it's a start. The other piece here is that they've allowed this to develop as a free market, this being Uber and Lyft, Whereas the taxi cab industry is not a free market. The taxi cab industry is highly regulated. There are more fees to pay, more licenses to get. There's a lot more going on in the taxi cab industry. And there have been a lot of people over time that have profited, particularly the city of New York, by regulating it, running it, making money off the licenses. So they've been in business with the taxi cab drivers for a very long time. And now this free market model comes in. And don't kid yourself. New York's got some skin in the game in that as well. So they're kind of playing both sides here, but they're different models. Now, is Uber and Lyft, are they complete free market models? No, because they're tied to corporations, but they're more free than the taxi cab industry. Therefore, they're more disruptive. So what you have is you have these two competing paradigms in place. And the city of New York, the state of New York, and quite frankly, the country probably needs to do something, right? Needs to do something. It needs to curtail. This would be the Apollonian sort of decision here. It needs to curtail immigration so that there could be a more graceful, balanced, and rhythmic level of assimilation. So you don't have people offing themselves because they're working 14 hours a day and making $75. It doesn't cut it. The bigger problem, ultimately, besides these disruptive types of economies, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, you know who they are. Besides that, the big elephant in the room, right, is automation and AI, which is coming. It's coming. And I have no clue how they're going to solve the job crisis. I mean, when I started to talk about this 10 years ago, I've been talking about this now for 10 years. And ultimately, it comes down to they're just going to need a lot less humans. They're going to need a lot less humans because of what technology and AI is going to do and provide. It's not, and you can see on TV now, there are a host of commercials that are beating the drum for AI. You can see the programming. You can see the propaganda in place. One of the big culprits is Sprint, and they've got a series of commercials where they've hired robots to be a part of the staff. Do you think it's just a cute advertising and marketing ploy? No, it's not. It's to get people used to the fact that in the near future, they're going to be working side by side with robots. This is coming. And that's kind of the cartoonish example of what I'm talking about. There are others. You have Common, Common the rapper. He's rapping. He's just totally rapping about welcome to AI. AI, it is so cool. And with AI, we can fly. We can soar. We can rebuild a 14th century monastery. We can make sure that this tomato goes from where it's grown all the way to market with amazing blockchain technology. I mean, this is what they're selling. Intel has hired Jeffrey Wright. And Jeffrey Wright is one of the actors from Westworld. And he's doing the exact same thing. He's selling this digital transformation. That's what he's talking about. Digital transformation. Watching the very world around us go from analog to digital in all of its aspects. So we're seeing this now in commercials. They are laying the groundwork. They are wrapping people's heads around the fact that this is going to be great. It's going to be great. In technology, we're at a threshold now where technology is going to impact our lives like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Mostly Hiroshima. That was the big one, right? That's what's going to happen. That is what, and there's no real plan in place for that. Now, can we take advantage of it and use technology for our own ends? I would say the answer to that is yes. Cody Wilson, the guy who made the gun with his 3D printer. It's an interesting use of technology. There's maker culture, which I've talked about at great length in the past, uses digital technology, physical technology to create things. So the tools are there. Like we could use them. There's an investment threshold. If you want to get a really good 3D printer, you're looking at around 8K, high-end 3D printer around 15K. And then you've got to go through some training and learning how to do things. But that's available. You could do that if you want to. It's going to be very tricky here. Very, very tricky. I mean, we can see the new paradigm being rolled out right before our very eyes. Right before our very eyes. I was watching a commercial last night. One of the things they love to do now with commercials, they love to show, and again, watch out, I'm crossing the PC line. But in commercials, they will love to show somebody who is mixed race and who is young and could be a girl or could be a boy. That's like the ultimate advertising icon now. You sit there and you scratch your head and say, okay, is that a girl? Is that a boy? We know they're mixed. Right? So this is what they're going to. This is the model. It's like, here you go. This is the model of the new America. This is the model of the new world in general. So I was watching it was a commercial for the new iPhone. And it was one of these new advertising icons. It's an icon. It's a symbol. There's nothing derogatory. I'm just telling you. I'm describing the cipher in some ways. So this young girl, and I believe she's a girl, certainly she's mixed. She's on a bus. That's important to understand. She's on a bus. She's not in a car. She's on a bus. And she's using her iPhone because she's listening to music, right? She's got a soundtrack in her head going on. And the bus is going down a city street. And she is seeing like wild shit. Like the world is coming alive. She's witnessing a movie set as she's driving by it in some action moment with the car. She's witnessing this other thing. This guy walking his chicken down the street. Oh, what an adventure. What a great time to be on that bus. What a great time to have this wonderful phone that allows you to have a rich soundtrack to all the crazy, high strange that you're going to see, right? While you're on the city bus. You see, that's programming. That's what they're getting kids. See, that's a kid. And they're getting kids. This is an iPhone freaking 10. Okay, and this is a kid. So they're getting kids to wrap their heads around this technology. Number one, they don't want this kid to go ask their parents, hey, I need a new iPhone 10 Plus. Oh, everybody else has an iPhone 10 Plus. Oh, why can't I have an iPhone 10 Plus? Okay. We've got to keep your status up so you can feel good about yourself. So your self-esteem doesn't suffer at the hands of other people having these little shiny trinkets that might be more socially valuable than what you have. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm feeling a little sarcastic today. Anyway, this is what's being programmed into us from Jeffrey Wright and Common, just going on and on and on about the beauty and the wonder of AI, from Verizon introducing robots into the workplace to our friends at Apple introducing the bus, public transportation, as a vehicle. You see, this is where the world is going. And what the fuck are people going to do? What are they going to do? At some point, human dignity is at stake here. And this is why people are committing suicide. Now, if I were Trump, I would do my damnedest to get hemp legalized in all 50 states in this country. so that we can have a hemp industry. People can grow it. People can make products from it. I would incentivize. Here's what I would do. I would incentivize small hemp growers. I would de-incentivize massive hemp farms. Like the higher your yield, the more tax you have to pay on it. So you could have this middle to lower tier that could be very, very productive. You would discourage high yield hemp growers. Of course, there would be high yield hemp growers and they'd pay the tax. But it would be a significant tax. You could redirect that tax for something good, right? This is what I would do. Hemp, I'm telling you right now, you go back and you look at what happened with hemp during the war when they needed it. People started growing it because they could make anything out of hemp. Anything. Clothes, cars, computers. You combine hemp with a 3D printer and a maker, and all of a sudden, boom, cottage industries. Okay? So I believe, let's get into a little astrology here, Uranus and Taurus, radicalizing the production process, bringing technology, personal technology into the production process so that you as an individual can become a small factory unto yourself. But you're going to need product. You're going to need some sort of actual supply and demand. It can be done. And somebody out there, if they have a vision, they should be creating a school so that people can actually do things like this. And I'm telling you right now, hemp is the key to it all because of its versatility, its ability to grow anywhere, and anybody who can grow it. Think of all the products that could come to market. It'd be so cool, right? It'd be very cool. Anyway, see, this is part of the Apollonian culture that we have to adapt to and adjust to. It's about taking our power back. We're talking about the sun. We're talking about activity. We're talking about daytime activity. We're not talking about sort of the lunar escape. And the lunar escape is fine. I'm not here to demonize it. I mean, it's balance, right? Like the lunar piece is about imagination and going into a place where you get inspired. Inspiration and madness are very closely related. But in order to make that work, you've got to have the power of the sun. You've got to have the power of will. And I believe it's been a complete and utter imbalance for a long time. So what we're looking at now is a correction. It is a market correction. I saw a headline on, what was it? Was it Yahoo or kind of a mainstream news outlet? Trumpism is winning, and here's why it's terrifying. It is winning. You cannot deny it. It's winning, and there's a reason why it's winning. It's because it's speaking to something, whether or not you like Trump, and I'm not here to trumpet Trump, but it is speaking to this dormant factor inside of ourselves that ultimately allows us to take charge of our lives. And you may say, well, aren't you tilting at windmills? We're going to have Agenda 2030. We're going to have 5G. Well, maybe. Maybe there's a small community just outside of San Bernardino that opted out of Agenda 2030. They voted. Get the fuck out of our city charter. Small towns in Northern California, like Mill Valley and San Anselmo and Fairfax, they voted down 5G. You see, it is not as much of a done deal as we'd like to think. Could it happen in certain communities? Absolutely. Does Trump want to roll this thing out? Yeah, because in his mind, it's going to create jobs. Well, we get to create a whole new infrastructure and people go out and build the stuff. And, I could add more jobs to my list. And by the way, it's a pretty nifty control grid. Anyway, it's not bad. Here's the challenge. It comes down to the white sun versus the black sun. And I'm going to get into that tomorrow. We'll talk about the white sun versus the black sun as the competition and the rise for the new Apollonian culture is upon us. Let me check in with the chat room, see how everybody is doing in there. Just give me a sec here. What do we got? We got 33 people. Changing up to Panama City or somewhere west. What do we got here? Good morning from the path of Hurricane Michael. Can the robots come and help us clean up after the storm? Oh yeah, we got a hurricane. We got to track that. Keep us informed, Rhonda, and stay safe down there. That's in Florida. These SoundCloud rappers are openly saying they're clones now as well. Oh yeah, so that was started with what's his name? Donald Marshall, right? What else do we have? Constant bombardment. I'm loving your thinking on the hemp topic. Yeah. Okay. I got to get out of here. That's a client. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to sip when it's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining. Tell your friends, subscribe. All right. Have a great day.